Okay, we are live Monday, May 26th, 2025. The headline on the screen right here is what I want to start off talking about. Because if you've been following this thread that we've been on since last month, when I found out that Final Destination was involving the Space Needle, we've correlated the Space Needle symbolically to the concept of the Tower of Babel falling. And this has been connected with the Twin Towers, the One World Trade Tower, Space Odyssey 2001 with the allusion to the monolith, which corresponds to the Monolith Hotel there at Ground Zero. Like there's this narrative that involves the sinking of the West as embodied by the Tower of Babylon, Tower of Babel in the megalopolis. It was Make Rome Great Again, the fall of Rome. And so this has been like a story that's been building up. And I don't think you can separate the International Space Station from this metaphor. It's all the nations, one language, going from the earth to the heavens, transgressing into this other into the heavens. And the space program, the internet, it all kind of integrates us into this one monolith. And it looks like, just based on this movie, the Space Needle being the center of it, it just kind of reinforces that that's what we're witnessing, that this is a continuation of 9/11. And the idea of the space station falling apart was foreshadowed even more, I think, directly with ISS that came out on January 19th a couple of years ago, where Russia and America are at war on Earth, nuking each other, and so they're fighting for control over the space station. A terrible movie, needlessly graphic, and I think they intentionally made their special effects bad to make the ISS look good by comparison. Anyway, long story short, I'm connecting here, and we can go through the weeds here if we feel like it, but the Titanic sinking, Twin Towers, One World Trade Tower, this is all kind of the same story. So the next thing, in my view, would be the fall of the space station, which doesn't have to be literal, but it's been foreshadowed in so many ways. And I've kind of kept it more or less in the same discussion. Like, for example, the One World Trade Tower and the Space Needle, both correlating to the Tower of Babel. These are easy things to connect, especially if you get into the meaning of 1776 and the nuance there. But these monuments, these are part of this meta narrative. So anyway, it's interesting to see that part of this architecture, the space station, is being represented in these various movies as, falling down. I was talking about the series The 100, where at the end of the season, the space station falls. And in that episode, they even have a painting of the Tower of Babel. And I brought this up recently because one of the main characters in The 100 is in this Final Destination, which again centers around the destruction of the Space Needle. So it's not just a random building. It's representative of much more. And this recent movie in this series connects the first one in this storyline that connects 9/11 and some future event involving Seattle. So anyway, as we've been discussing this, the date June 11th is repeatedly showing up. So June 11th, a few other dates, like November the 3rd is another common one. But for some reason, we've been looking at June 11th, well, for a lot of reasons. Drastic Liars highlights this quite a bit. So I found this to be interesting, is that it was announced today that on June 11th, that's the last day that the International Space Station website will be maintained. So NASA is pulling the plug on their space station tracking website on June 11th. So on June 12th, you better have your own apps if you want to track it. And the date of it just tracks with everything else that we've been talking about. And I'm not saying necessarily that the space station is going to fall, but it just seems to me that it's really symbolic of unity above. And it seems like if there is some kind of event in Seattle, as has been foreshadowed in so many different movies and themes, and I'm going to go through Leo Pirate's article on this about the Space Needle being the next 9/11. We'll go through all the foreshadowing that is pointing in this direction. And then we'll, of course, take questions on it and comments, but I'm correlating the Space Needle. Now, here's where it gets intriguing, because the Space Needle, symbolically, again, space, if you look at space, is heaven. And so, of course, the Tower of Babel analogy here would fit, because the UFO on top of it is meant for traveling to space. And the Space Needle has this, in these various ways it's represented, it has this reoccurring themes of, the nukes being associated with it, the Kraken, but also weirdly, the eye has been kind of tied to this thing. And so I was talking about how in this movie, Final Destination, the main character's name is Iris. And when the movie opens up, she's blindfolded, which has to mean something. And then she's brought up to the opening night of this Space Needle, and the blindfold is removed. So you have this connection with the eye and the needle, and so there's something here with this. And then someone sent to me a Simpsons episode where Itchy and Scratchy, right here, are fighting on the Space Needle. And one of the things we talked about also is how Abraham Lincoln and the penny have been associated with this. Specifically, the Space Needle in Final Destination, they have the penny is what sets off its destruction, weirdly, but additionally, even in the trailer, you see the penny, you see Abraham Lincoln's face superimposed over the exploding UFO part of it, the exploding restaurant. So here's an old Simpsons episode where the mouse is on top of the Space Needle throwing a penny down, trying to kill the cat. And that actually happens in Final Destination. There's a little kid trying to throw a penny and she stops him. But that penny is what brings it all down. So you have the penny thing. And yeah, this was pointed out by Silent D Marijuano tweeted this to me. So I watched it, and in the clip, the mouse saws the Space Needle off, and the top part of it falls, and the needle itself goes right into the cat's eyeball. Now, yesterday I was talking about the opening sequence of the Elvis movie, where it's the International Hotel, but it has these three columns in front, superimposed here, as you can see on the screen, with the Starship Enterprise, making it into essentially a Space Needle. And if you watch the opening montage, which is available on YouTube, you actually see, from the camera's view, someone going onto the UFO thing, and it spins around, it goes down, and it becomes an eye. So the Space Needle goes into an eye, and then it jumps to a scene where Elvis is unconscious, and they're playing the theme song to Space Odyssey, and they bring out a needle, which they stick him with, and it resurrects him. So the connection here, of course, the Space Needle, Space Odyssey, the eye, for some reason, there's some overlapping themes here. Itchy and Scratchy mirroring exactly what happened in Final Destination. And again, Final Destination opening scene is the opening night of the Space Needle. And last Friday, just a few days ago, the Century project that we've been talking about has finally reached a milestone. They opened up their Skyliner. Skyview, opening night. Skyliner, opening night. And having it on the 23rd makes it even more significant if you look into the number 23 in the Final Destination series. Now, in a rambling kind of way, what I'm pointing out here, and this is something that's made very clear in Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, Make Rome Great Again, and then it talks about the empire falling, how you can't just bring down Rome in one night. That there's a process to taking down an empire. And so I think this is a story that's being told over multiple major psyops and events, because history is being written in advance. I mean, ultimately, that's the purpose of fake news. So we're living through something that's already been written, and they have the best writers and directors who are conveying these major psyops. James Cameron's involvement with the Titanic movie, for example, and his connection with 9/11, predictive programming. I mean, it's all there. You can kind of see the architects of various aspects of it, but they have strongly correlated the Titanic, the West, and the space station as symbols of this one world unity that's going to fall. And even the numbers, we get into the numbers like 9/11, 119. it all comports, which we'll get into. But again, the fact that 6/11 is the last day for NASA's website where you can track their space station, what does that mean? Are they defunding this particular PSYOP? Okay, we're going to shut off this particular PSYOP. This is the cutoff date. It would be inconsistent for this thing to still be in operation, at least according to the app. It could just be a coincidence. I mean, anybody here believe in coincidences when it comes to world stagery? What's up, Marcel? Let's go. Oh, Kyoto says, I saw Mickey 17 last night. Okay, so Mark Ruffalo was Donald Trump. The main character, Mickey 17, of course, shoots at him, the cut on his face, and then he poses before the camera. That's so beyond, exactly as you say, it's beyond random. And he denies, the director denies, that Ruffalo is based on Trump. But it's layered. But the fact is, he was talking about colonizing an all-white planet. He had the Trump cadence, the way he spoke, his inflections. He had the little hand sign. He had this political cult. It was 100% Donald Trump. And Mark Ruffalo, his birthday happens to be November 22nd, which is JFK's death day. And this is a reoccurring theme. We see that many of these Trump proxies in these movies have real-life connections, weirdly, to JFK in terms of their birth dates. And these, like Dennis Hopper in the Mario Brothers movie. He's King Koopa, and they melt the Twin Towers called the Koopa Towers. Well, Dennis Hopper was born, or no, he died on JFK's birthday, which is the birthday of John Hinckley Jr., who shot Reagan, and who was inspired by Robert De Niro playing Travis Bickle, the basis for the Joker, who shoots Robert De Niro as Murray Franklin. And it all ties together in a non-random, non-crazy way. It ties together in a way that a story would, a novel, a script would unfold. And I call it metascript because it encompasses many years, many different movies, many actors, but they're portraying the same story and advancing it as they go. And we've been following a number of interesting threads. So the Mickey 17 one, a couple of connections here. So yes, he clearly reenacts Butler, which doesn't make sense because the movie was recorded before Butler, including posing in front of the camera with the bloody cheek. Like, obviously we're looking at some predictive programming, concurrent programming, whatever you want to call it. But beyond that, the character who replaces him as the leader is that the black woman who is analogous to Betty Pearson, a black woman in the Fallout. And then you have the same thing in Civil War. A black female soldier kills the Trump guy at the end of the Civil War. So there's a recurring theme there as well. Mark Ruffalo previously played the Hulk. And I mention this because Harrison Ford in the new Captain America becomes the Red Hulk. And he survives a near assassination attempt in that movie. And the trailer aired the day before Butler, so Marvel changed it. So that's a second movie that specifically correlates with the Trump shooting, overlapping timing with these releases. And in that one, the Red Hulk, I think, is kind of interesting considering Mark Ruffalo was the Green Hulk. And so I'm thinking Red Hulk, MAGA, Trump in its final form. Not quite sure, but there's some kind of symbolism here, especially with this green versus red, and Ruffalo being anti-Trump. There's some kind of messaging here, like the symbol or the color green with Luigi, and then you had the Green Beret who blew up his Cybertruck in front of the Trump Tower. Jay Diggs says there's an event being called The Rattle in Seattle occurring tomorrow on the steps of City Hall. Trantifa versus evangelicals. Right. And I think there's going to be... There was something I saw today in Discord regarding a group of Patriot Front or something cramming up in a U-Haul like they did a couple years ago. So that's happening again. And they're going to come out and they're going to protest all the leftist groups that are going to be protesting. I mean, they get their permits months in advance. The stuff is predictable. And by the way, the 250th anniversary of American independence. So Independence Day is coming up. And between now and Independence Day, Donald Trump said, breaking, a monumental year-long celebration to mark the 250th anniversary of American independence to commence on Memorial Day and conclude on July 4th. So we're having some kind of a long, year-long celebration that will continue through July 4th, 2026. Which sounds like madness, state-olatry. All these QAnon people are worshiping Trump like he's Caesar, like he's some kind of god on earth. It's really sickening. I've been following these JFK Jr. people, and they're like saying, quit your jobs. The government's going to give you money through something called Nicera. They're going to take it from the deep state and give it to you. And I just jokingly play along with it. I'm like, hey, JFK Jr., I quit my job because I trust in you. And he wouldn't care if this was real, and I really quit my job because I thought that JFK was going to come back and somehow cancel all my debts. I don't know. I mean, you would expect them to have some kind of culpability, but nope. They don't care about you. They just want your clicks. Remember that. They just want your clicks, these engagement baiters. And that's the main game here. It's not truth. All right, joined by Hero Paranormal, Austin 108, Pete Trippa, Lean Dion, Ted Striker 2112, Jungle Jim, thanks for joining. Tomanoid says, I thought 3/11 was the next 9/11. Well, a 9/11, in my view, is just a world transformative psyop. So that would be a Pearl Harbor. That would be a 9/11, 9/11. That would be a COVID. That would be the George Floyd event, which had many connections specifically to 9/11. So 9/11 was really just one major spectacle of a type. And there are many such events. I would consider the moon landing to be such an event. The Challenger explosion. It depends on how significant it is, I think mostly globally, when we talk about the 9/11 scale things. So 2020 certainly contained that. But the next major plot twist seems to involve the domestic terrorist equivalent of a 9/11. And just as they use the war on terror to shut down radical Islam, they're going to shut down radical MAGA band, radical QAnon, radical 4chan culture, where it's, you know, the white nationalism stuff. I can see them using the pretext of a domestic terrorist attack to justify increasing the censorship. I mean, they already do this. They already tested this with Christchurch when they shut down 4chan and BitChute. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on Mickey17, Coyote, if you get around to commenting on it. There were a lot of things in there, a bit more nuanced, but it's one of many movies that foreshadowed the Trump near death, the assassination attempt. And this one in particular, the fact that he was acting like Trump and he demanded the cameraman focus on him so he could pose for the cameras, and that the shooter looks like Luigi in the trailer. I said that when I saw the trailer. I said this movie's got a Luigi proxy, and that's the guy who pulls the trigger to shoot the Trump character. So this isn't life following art or art following life, because of course this was recorded before. But no, it's actually the synchronization of entertainment propaganda with the news propaganda. Challenger Hoax is here, says, have you seen the Punky Brewster episode about the Challenger hoax? I think I've seen it on Twitter, where it's this show about this little girls watching the Challenger explosion and crying, and it's like they totally take over. They traumatize. They emotionally traumatize everybody, make everybody feel bad about it. It's a teacher. I think I might have cried about the Challenger. I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure it was like a psyop that they, like, for example, was it really live? Or did the teachers get a tape and then play it for you, making you think it was live? We're not telling you. Challenger Hoax says, I never saw the whole thing. It's hard to get through the whole episode. Just put it on a 1.75. I do that with a lot of stuff I have to listen to. A lot of these podcasts. Like, I listen to people I'm embarrassed to say I listen to because I have to. How else would we know that Tucker Carlson survived an alien attack? Mizell says, we laughed. I was in the 8th grade watching it live. Well, we had a teacher, a science teacher, who every year on the anniversary of the Challenger explosion would take one of those homemade rocket kits and launch a rocket. Like, they dramatized it. And Ronald Reagan came out and he said, perhaps it's because we're not paying attention anymore. And it's true. NASA kind of jumped the shark when they started playing golf on the moon. Like, nobody cared anymore. And I think I found this article once that was just describing how Evel Knievel was getting more views than NASA at the time. And the Challenger explosion allowed them to get eyeballs back on space and then guilt trip you for not paying attention. And when Reagan came out and talked about it, he was mentioning how it was on the anniversary of Apollo 1. So feel bad about that. And then that was on the anniversary of Sir Francis Drake dying at sea. So then there's the exploration aspect of it. But this idea it's like destiny or something. Cool story. But a couple of things. It was 1 minute and 13 seconds into the launch. And the Columbia shuttle was the 113th. And this 113, we talked about it yesterday, is one of these reoccurring numbers. And it seems to tie in repeatedly to this idea of like, so the Challenger being destroyed. I think the Challenger could be a way of referencing the West or perhaps even America. As William Cooper, who claims he had security clearance of Q, he said he had Q clearance, but he wrote it out as the shuttle names were telling the story, that it was the Columbian endeavor to discover Atlantis and Challengers would be destroyed. And I thought that was kind of one of my first examples of this notion of a meta script, like this scripted history with like Shakespearean double entendres, subtexts, foreshadowing. Like we pretty much live in a movie enhanced reality. We don't live in a movie. Everything is real, except the stuff that is fake. But you can delineate between the two if you pay attention. Most people don't. They're confused by design. Coyote says Epstein had plans in New Mexico to have a breeding farm to make babies using to impregnate them like White Planet in the movie M17. That's right. In my Censored South Pole episode, Epstein was still alive and he sold the temple to Musk, who turned the subterranean breeding farms into a place to experiment with like Dr. Moreau type hybrids. But yeah, actually he has a place here. Epstein does have a ranch. And a local reporter got some blueprints, and apparently they said that in the basement at the bottom of an elevator, the first thing you see when the elevator opens is a life-sized painting of Ghislaine Maxwell nude holding a knife. Which makes me think that she must be some kind of high priestess in their cult. And there are so many examples, movies that I could think of where, you know, it's like under the facade of a dance academy. It's actually a satanic cult and you got some high priestess behind it all who's sacrificing the noobs. And that's kind of what she seems like. I mean, that's terrifying. I've never seen the painting, but it exists. I've been waiting to see it, but it's there. Ryler5 says, tomorrow is the 88th anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge. I remember Gilbert Godfrey was saying to stay away from the Golden Gate Bridge, and there was some buzz about that. The only thing I can think of regarding the Golden Gate Bridge is that there was sort of a connection to it made when the Dolly hit the Francis Scott Key Bridge, because there was this monument there at the Golden Gate, the Francis Scott Key Monument, that BLM vandalized and then put an art installation over it that was dedicated to the 1619 White Lion ship and those initial captives. So that directly connects to the idea of the 1619 project and the idea of the national anthem, of course, being vandalized, Francis Scott Key. Also ties in strongly with Leave the World Behind. And we analyze this in depth. So when the Dolly hit the Francis Scott Key Bridge, it was at 1:28 a.m. And of course, 1:28 ties into the release date of Leave the World Behind. And we found a number of instances of that number, in fact, overly represented with many of these seemingly disparate events. And that's the only reason we pay attention to the numbers. I mean, there's actually stories, narratives, propaganda messages that you could kind of point to that are far more concrete. The numbers are just, I don't know, I look at it as some kind of internal communication for the most part, but there is some occult aspect to all of it. So tomorrow being the 88th anniversary doesn't mean anything. I don't really think so necessarily. But it has to. the Golden Gate Bridge, like the Space Needle, like the One World Trade Tower, these are more than just utilitarian structures. They have a occult purpose. They tell a story. The height of the One World Trade Tower being 1776, the opening date, all of this stuff has more than just the mundane. There's like an esoteric aspect to it. Challenger Hoax says, what does NASA stand for? Need another 7 astronauts. You know, I was debating with Fight the Flat Earth. Does he still have a job? Is he still milking the Flat Earth thing now that the Antarctica trip happened? Well, Fight the Flat Earth and I were debating, and he and his cohort just couldn't deal with anything I'd show them. I would say, hey, look, on the ESA footage, the space station has a shadow, and it's a big black dot, and there wouldn't be a shadow 295 miles above, 295 miles below something the size of a football field. I mean, maybe it could possibly create something of a shadow, but there's no way it would be seen from space as a dark patch on the Earth. And looking at the size of the shadow, it was bigger than a city. So I pointed this out, and I said, hey, Fight the Flat Earth, McToon, what do you think of this shadow on the Earth? And there's also another guy, I think his name was Red's Rhetoric. And Red's Rhetoric said, oh, that's just a smudge. That was his answer. It was a smudge, like a smudge on the camera. And I'm trying to make the point here, that's not a camera. This is a CGI simulated environment with a camera view. And the shadow is technically correct. It's the right angle, but it wouldn't be there. So whoever made this computer model screwed up. And they said it was a smudge. So I produced several other examples of the so-called smudge. We called this Smudge Gate. And we used it to humiliate them for a bit. But at one point I mentioned, I said, okay, since they said, well, that's not our claim. We're not defending the space station. So that's when they said they would no longer defend the ISS. They only want to talk about the curve of the Earth and stellar observations. So I kind of changed tack and I said, well, let's talk about the fake Challenger explosion. And as soon as I said that, Fight the Flat Earth started to cry. I made a grown man cry. And, you know, this guy usually comes off as kind of tough. He's always very cantankerous, feisty on his debates. He's very verbally abusive, but I reduced him to blubbering and tears. And I felt bad, and we just cut the whole conversation off. So it's a sensitive topic for some people. Okay, moving on. Lost Age says, I like what you say about space being what's between our ears. It's true. Because the space program was never about taking you to some distant Disneyland on Mars, but it was always about managing the space between your ears. It's about your worldview. And so they show you the world. This is the game board, and you're screwing it up with your carbon footprints. Stop breathing so much. I'm going to tax you for that. So they get you to acquiesce to this scarcity model based on their view from space. But in reality, their whole space program likely doesn't just focus on what's up. But I think the space program, as evidenced by Kubrick's involvement in multiple Psyops, has to do with all of the Psyops. In other words, psychological warfare, which is mind war. Again, the war for the space between your ears. So this would include fake assassinations, as well as the fake space, fake terror attacks, and maybe even all the fake celebrity scandals. I mean, Eyes Wide Shut was all about elite pervs. And what do we see in the news? Diddy, Epstein. In all likelihood, these are all psychological operations. Not all psyops involve fireworks. Joined by Rebel Black says, Tim's a bully. Yeah, I cyber-bullied Fight the Flat Earth into submission. It's embarrassing. If I'm going to cry, I'm going to get offline first. But I think he used it as an out because I had them cornered. They had no defense against clear evidence of media fakery, and it became opinions like, well, it looks fake to me, doesn't look fake to me. And that argument of it looks fake to me, doesn't look fake to you, it's like we can agree to disagree. No, we can't. There are objective metrics and standards. And one of them is, well, compare the ISS to what we see on Netflix. How come real space looks faker than admitted fake space. This is why it's such a problem that Tom Cruise wants to make a movie on the space station. They have a module they're attaching to the space station. I think it's called Axion, and it's this movie set on the space station. And this gives me cognitive dissonance because I'm like, wait a minute. Space station's a movie set. Now they're putting a movie set on the movie set. And are the movies on the movie set going to look realer in their special effects than the slop that NASA gives us? And if so, that's a problem. Like, people noticed that Kate Perry's hair wasn't doing the space thing. It was just sitting there flat. So people realize, okay, Kate Perry didn't go to space. Well, Tom Cruise, what are they going to do with his hair? Well, he's going to be on the ISS, so his hair is going to have to do something. Now, is it going to be hairsprayed? It's going to stick up ridiculously? I don't think he would do that. It would destroy his image. So likely they're going to want some smooth CGI effects, like he's swimming in water, but then it's going to make the NASA hair look really terrible. If I was running the op, I would make everybody shave their heads. Everybody. Like the twins, Mark and Scott Kelly. Just say, hey, we can't have your hair floating around and getting in the machinery. You know, you're going to be up there for 6 months. All right, moving on. Rebel Black says, Tim, this is where it's at. I'm rebranding. Oh, awesome. This is where it's at. Long-time caller. In fact, we are just celebrating the 5th anniversary of the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin psyop. And a lot of people just joined us around that time. So I'm hoping, and I am hoping that we get a nice plot twist. Like this, there's been so much of a build-up, and I'm not really hinging everything on a specific date. But if we look at the past precedent, they do when it comes to these big events. And these things are not random. They're not behind the scenes, last minute, like, hey, when are we going to run this particular Spike Lee directed psyop where this dirty cop kneels on this guy's neck for 8:46? No, that stuff is planned in advance, as evidenced by a number of things. The sun setting at 8:46, the kneeling for 8:46, correlating with 9/11 kicking off at 8:46. And we have so many examples of the theme of twins being brought into the story. You know, Twin Cities, of course, the twin Stephen Jackson coming out and talking and really stirring things up. Of course, Derek Chauvin and him working together didn't make sense, so they kind of scrubbed that from the story. It's a multi-layered psyop, and it's also guardrailed. So it's a good example of guardrailing. So the mainstream version is he was killed by systemic oppression, essentially. That absent that, he would still be alive. The guardrail version is he was killed by fentanyl, which you can blame on Biden for opening the borders and letting China in with their drugs. So you have this right-wing version of it where, oh, he's dead, but it's your fault. Left-wing version, he's dead, but it's your guys' fault. And these two versions are what I would call the MSM, mainstream mediation, and then MSM plus, the one that agrees but adds something else. And so this tug of war between, you know, what killed him has been going on for 5 years, and none of the people talking about this ever address the idea that he didn't even die, that the whole thing was quite literally a psyop, not a false flag. Speaking of false flags, we're still waiting for the false flag that Tucker Carlson predicted. The ethnic-based, Black Lives Matter-based, or Patriot Front-based psyop to come. And I have to also point out, this 6/11 thing has been consistently associated with far right, like woke right, extreme right, the QAnon right, the whole 6/11 armor of God thing that they glommed onto. Timothy McVeigh's execution date, Trump shot at 6/11. So 6/11 has been tied to both domestic violent extremists, which makes sense if you look at it as an inverted 9/11, but also it's been tied to the nuke itself. Some kind of a bomb that they get by working with Russia, perhaps. Something along those lines. So we'll see. But Seattle has been pointed out repeatedly in many of these various examples, this foreshadowed coming event. By the way, there was a truck attack today If you haven't seen it, this was in Liverpool. And it's a van, rather. It's a van that ran through a group of people. And, at first watch, it looks real. But there's a few things that I took to be red flags. And there are some discrepancies as to whether the person pulled out of it was really 53 years old, or the driver, was he the real person they pulled out of the van. So there's a lot of questions right now. So before I make any final statements on it, I'm going to kind of let the truth bait, the truther bait, the false leads get sifted out. But do I think it's real? I don't have enough information. Looking real isn't enough. When I first saw it, I thought it was. And I said, if it's real, there's not going to be a high body count. If it's fake, 33 people died. There's limbs everywhere. That's how you know it's fake. It's always like video game violence. So this didn't seem to have that. So I'm inclined to think it's possibly real. But other things that make me think maybe not. Snipers spotted on the roof. It was some kind of a football game or something, so people in uniforms. And if you're running a psyop in the streets, you can do it if the participants are all in uniform, so that they can be visually separated when you close off a movie set for what is essentially a flash mob, sort of like the Boston Marathon. Not that difficult to pull off. So we'll continue to look at that. A couple other developments. Synchromorphia said, is this a lead up to 6/11? Trump says Putin has gone absolutely crazy and warns of the downfall of Russia. And then we have the Russian space nuke that they lost control of, in case you forgot. We have all these world-ending threats, and it's just so many of them. It's like, which one should we focus on? Like, which ones are worth our attention? And that's kind of what I try to do here. Like, these are the threats worth paying attention to. Okay, Cubstar says, in relation to Mickey 17 and the resurrection theme, there are two 33s I noticed in the movie. The first one is when Mickey 17 gets back to base after being lifted out of the hole by the creepers. He gets back at 3:30 and finds out Mickey 18 has been printed. The second time is at the end. The position he references to his girlfriend on the diagram is C3, and she rescues the baby creeper from falling in the incinerator. Mickey 18 blows himself up just after. Okay, I didn't catch that. I did see the conspicuous 18 when he pushes the button, and of course the twin symbolism. There were twins of Mickey throughout most of the movie. Rebel Black says, riots coming this summer. Well, they've set the stage with Shiloh, and then, okay, Carmelo Anthony is being tried as an adult. They said first-degree murder, and a lot of people have a problem with that because they say, well, that's premeditation, and this was self-defense. So already it looks like some kind of systemic bias against him. That's how it's going to be framed. And we still have that story of Tyler Butler, who defended his house against 3 white teenagers breaking into his house in the backyard, and he's being charged with murder even though he was defending his house. And people are saying double standard. So I can see the rage bait steadily being dripped out there. And then you have one of the top performing horror movies of all time right now, Sinners, where it's white racist vampires and the Klan gets gunned down at the end. And around the time this movie came out, of course, in the movie, it has the protagonists are twins. And one of them dies bleeding in the other's arms, just like what happened with Austin Metcalf and his brother. So you have these multiple overlaps with these various psyops. You had, Rodney Hinton Jr., his son dies, he takes revenge, kills a cop. The cop happens to have the 6/11 birthday, and he served for 33 years. Remember, Trump shot at 6/11 and 33 seconds. McVeigh executed 6/11, age 33. And McVeigh was radicalized at Waco, where Trump kicked off his campaign. Like, again, there's a script here. There's a story. There's this big back and forth. That's why they keep showing I think the twin symbolism may tie into this. But, to get back to it, with Sinners, so I watched the movie, and you've got the twins, one dying. We have all this overlap, but the narrative of the systemic racism, the Klan behind the scenes, and at the end, he righteously mows down the Klan. And then shortly after this, Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones are claiming that they're expecting a false flag having to do with this dynamic they've set up. So what does it mean? as far as a false flag. Like, what are they suggesting? It could be anything, but Tucker said he was making a prediction, and the reason why this matters is that Tucker Carlson knows the script. He's obviously part of this play. He's a psyop actor, an agent in this. Anik Skeen says, observing the early psyops like Le Mans racing disaster of June 11th, 1955 with 84 deaths. I haven't seen that one, but one thing I like to do is I like to go back and see how far back we can actually see these things. You know, you could find examples of Trump in entertainment media as he exists right now in 2025. You can find examples of that back in 1958, like with Trackdown. And when the mainstream media noticed Trackdown, foreshadowing Trump and building the wall and all this stuff, that was in 2016. In that 1958 TV show, he's arrested. Well, Trump wasn't arrested until 2023. So not only was this movie noted for being predictive and eerily prescient, but it still had more predictions yet to come true. So Trump is a character that was created, you know, he's sort of a hyperstition. You know, they manufacture this character in the public imagination, and then someone arrives and fills the shoes. IFEPE73 says, seriously, how did that car get through? How was he allowed to drive through a closed-off section of a parade? Yeah, I think it's totally fakeable. And the guy rolling up on the hood, I mean, I've seen stunts. In fact, we were looking into stunt devils back in 2020 during the Summer of Love when you had Summer Diaz and what was the other one's name? Something Love. So you had these two dancers, Summer and Love, dancing in the street, and this white car comes and hits them. And looking at it, I thought, wait a minute, these are two very small, kind of slight women. But in the video, they look kind of like they're packed with padding or something, like large. And I watched some videos to see what various stuntmen can do when it comes to getting hit by cars. And it's an art form. But there are actors who are trained at getting hit by cars. Like it's not even a very impressive stunt. So it could have been totally fake. It looks fake to me. But I need more information. And it does look like there's a counter narrative here I saw where, and I'll pull it up on Twitter. You have the kind of, you know, what I guess the replacement theory type saying it was an immigrant. They're trying to cover it up by framing a white guy. I mean, you have all the usual guardrails. Nobody's calling it fake except for us. Ryla05 says, how much of World War II was fake? That's a good question. You know, how far back does total fakery go? You know, you could be safe about it and say, Michael Aquinos, you know, wrote about this, that at some point Mind War is going to take over for a lot of reasons. It's more efficient, gets the job done, pacifies the masses, it's scalable. There's so many reasons why Mind War is a better alternative to force. But in that book, PDF that was circulating the Pentagon, it seemed like this was a plan, something they could implement. Like it was theoretical at that point. So it's possible that maybe they kicked it into high gear in 2001. And then 2020 we go a little deeper where everything's going to, it could be scaling out or rather phasing out the old. But it's a very good question. Retro auto hoaxing is a valid pursuit. We can't cherry pick. And we have to also remember too that history is just a collection of fake news. It's always been the same interests. It's a curated worldview that really serves the interests of the power elite. Rebel Black says wars are mostly all fake. Countries that belong to the United Nations don't fight each other. Yeah, Jay Diggs, thank you. Summer Taylor in Diaz Love. It's like, yeah, Summer of Love. So one of them dies after getting hit, and then the other one's taking selfies in the hospital with a broken arm a few hours later. It just seemed very psyop-y. And it was right after Nancy Pelosi called it a summer of love. And so a white car mowing these two down while they're dancing in the street, ending the summer of love was kind of like morbidly poetic. Okay, moving on here. So we're talking about Putin going crazy. Okay, General Mark Milley today said We don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we're willing to die to protect it. So this is just more notable rhetoric as we're moving towards Trump's birthday. And if you go off of Francis Ford Coppola's work, The End of an Empire, he said it would happen soon. Make Rome great again. Again, that's the theme of his movie. Let's go through the Space Needle thing, because it's coming up. Possibly. Final Destination, Bloodlines 2025, features a prominent imagery of the destruction of the Space Needle-like building, which is consistent with other media foreshadowing. And yet, so the movie opens up in 1968, which is when the Twin Towers construction began. And so the premise of the movie is that the prophet managed to delayed the disaster. So when did it actually happen? Well, this disaster that was supposed to befall the Space Needle was transferred to the planes in the first movie, which again ties to 9/11. So the entire premise of this series is that this prophecy or this prophetic vision allowed somebody to avert a disaster that was destined to happen. So the end of it is the Space Needle still stands. But in these movies, from the first one to this latest one, you have an inside perspective of 9/11, from the inside of the plane to the inside of the tower, complete with jumpers, with overlapping allusions to the Titanic sinking. But again, it's got this general theme that this is essentially about a prophecy, which is what all predictive programming is. The use of entertainment as propaganda to legitimize staged fictional news events is a well-documented phenomenon. The man who coined the term public relations, Edward Bernays, was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, co-founder of Netflix. Okay, so an unfulfilled prophecy. The entire Final Destination series is rich with concurrent programming elements. The first movie was a year before 9/11 and centers on teenagers who cheat death by exiting Flight 180, which would later explode, departing from JFK Airport in New York. And we've talked about this before, how 9/11 and the JFK thing are correlated in many instances of predictive programming. Like, for example, The Lone Gunman, which was aired right before 9/11, had a plane that was going to hit the towers. One of the characters has a name that's an anagram for Lee Harvey Oswald. He mentions Lone Gunman here. There's quite a lot in this article. Mel Gibson starred in The Patriot 2000 that has a subconscious nod to 9/11. Final Destination franchise has a variety of screenplay writers and directors throughout the series. So he's done a deep dive here. And there are reoccurring allusions to Abraham Lincoln, and we talked about this yesterday. Why is Lincoln relevant? Well, the Lincoln assassination was mirrored in a lot of ways that historians have noted as just coincidental, but mirrored with the JFK assassination. And then we've seen the overlapping of the JFK mythos with Trump, mainly through the QAnon. So you have that subtext linking them. And now you have some overt linkages with Lincoln and Trump, such as the USDA with the Trump and the Lincoln faces draped over the front. But this movie has made the point to focus on the penny in Lincoln's head. And we've been talking about the significance of Daniel Penny strangling Jordan Neely, and how Daniel Penny is sort of a right-wing Luigi Mangione. Vigilante, hero to the elite, enemy of the poor, versus hero to the poor, enemy to the elite. But again, the symbol of the penny, the Civil War, and the headshot are all built into it. Now he mentions here the Century renovation project. So one of the things that I've noted, and he put a lot of, he added on to it here, is that many of the movies that foreshadow the destruction of the Space Needle reference the $100 bill. Even the Ben Franklin was in the news recently. I'll get into that later. It's this secret society story. But basically, the Century project was $100 million put into a renovation. And this $100 million is what bought the elevator they just opened up. That again mirrors the opening scene in the movie, which is about the Space Needle opening. So the Sentry project means $100 million. That's a lot of money for a psyop. That's an expensive hoax they're going to do. But the $100 bill folded up, many have noted for years, looks like the Space Needle with some kind of explosion above it. It's kind of subjective, but $20 bill folded up gives you the Twin Towers, which again, George Floyd was originally arrested over what? A $20 bill. So the currency, the penny, the $20 bill, the $100 bill, this was kind of a reoccurring theme here. But and again, I mentioned in the movie there was a character from a series called The 100, and season 1, episode 13, the space station explodes in the sky. So 100 Century Project, 100 years exactly between various examples of significant events in Lincoln's life and then events in JFK's life. So again, Century, the Cent. So there's a recurring build-up here. And then the Space Needle itself, and I think he's marked it here, is adjacent to what used to be called the EMP. And I put a link to this article in the newsletter, so that in the live stream notification, so you can pour through it yourself. Space Needle now has a double-decker all-glass elevator. 7 days after the release of the film, which again, the number 23 is encoded into the movie. Here we have the itchy and scratchy thing, where again it has a kid throwing a penny off the Space Needle. Here he is throwing the penny. Well, in the movie it's the kid. Here he is, the mouse. So you got the Abe Lincoln. I'm going to fast forward to the point where he saws the top of the Space Needle off, and it falls into the eye of the cat. And we talked about this character Iris, the eye, and the significance of the eye, and how it even figured into the Space Needle symbolism of the Elvis movie, tying into a literal needle as the Space Odyssey song is playing. And I think all of this ties in as well to Starman, with the character in the rock, the effigy in the car. But I want to focus for now on this. So here you have the cat with the Space Needle sticking in his eye. What the hell is that? And of course, Elvis is associated with the Space Needle, as JL talks a lot about, and he got the Vax on TV. I mean, this is something. It's not insignificant, and especially the fact that the penny and the eye thing connects to that movie we just talked about, The Final Destination. So let's move on here. The Destroyed Needle, or EMP, the summer blockbuster hit Deadpool Wolverine 2024. Both characters are transported to a realm where retired intellectual properties and destroyed structures are sent to. One can barely observe the torn down Seattle Space Needle in the background. You know, Fallout ends with a devastated landscape and a Space Needle-like event, or Space Needle-like structure, rather. And then, same director did Westworld, and the end of season 4 has this EMP-like situation, and has, even on the cover, it's got a skull, but you look in the skull and it's got this melted Space Needle, which is a reoccurring symbol throughout. The location of the Space Needle is significant. Here it is, next to the Experience Music Project. See EMP Museum. Electromagnetic pulse, which would cause the blackouts. Now they changed it. They changed the name of it, but it was called that. And then we have here, and I went to go see it, Wicked, which came out on 11/22. Well, it had 2 release dates. 1/13, which ties to this whole story we've been talking about. But also, it was then more widely released on 11/22. But it concludes with the Emerald City being hit with like an EMP, a blackout. So this is when the witch becomes wicked. She rebels. She has a falling out with the Wizard of Oz. She flies up into the sky. The song is Defying Gravity, which might have some significance here. But here you have the Wizard of Oz with the hexagons behind him. The witch flies up into the sky, and it looks like EMP. There's lightning bolts, like a high-altitude nuclear detonation, and then the Emerald City goes dark. Well, the city of Seattle is referred to as the Emerald City. So obviously there's an overlap here. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, 2009. Here's a clip here. An EMP blast simultaneously, look at this. The city of Seattle, located in the 42nd state, Washington, in one of the best-selling video games of its time, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 from 2009. One of the campaign missions involves a nuclear weapon detonating in space, simultaneously causing the destruction of the ISS and residual EMP through Washington, D.C. Okay, now, and by the way, and I'll put this in the notes, the author of this piece, Leo Pirate, was on Fakeologist today. So I'll put a link if you missed that. So this is interesting for a few reasons. EMP, high altitude explosion, a blackout over DC, destruction of the space station. And as I said, the space station's turning off their spotter website on the 11th of June. And here you have the pieces of it. But I went to go see this movie, Final Destination, opening up with the Space Needle, but the trailer for the Fantastic Four was right before it. And in that trailer, you have an object falling down from the sky, everybody's looking up, you have a big spectacular explosion, and then you see Earth from space, looks just like Call of Duty here, and the Earth goes into a blackout. All right, Rebel Black says, that episode of Lone Gunman is kind of important. Metascript writers have a template. Yeah, it's 100% the case here. And you have to stray away from straw man arguments. Like, you can't say that every director's in on it. We're not saying that whatsoever. We're talking about just effacing the distinction between news propaganda and entertainment propaganda. You know, there are many people who figured out that the news is largely rigged, staged, biased, obviously, but also that it incorporates psyops and outright fakery and simulations, but who haven't made the connection with all of the bizarre connections between the entertainment and what happens in the fake news. Well, it's the same department. I call it the psyop entertainment complex. Okay, again, here's what he says. This is from that article. The examples shared are a small sample of the subconscious suggestions pointing world stage audiences to the Seattle iconic structure in recent entertainment media. Foreshadowing, like, yeah, exactly. That's kind of what we've been talking about. The foreshadowing for this disaster is more voluminous than that which preceded 9/11. Such an event would be a coast-to-coast destruction of the U.S. landmarks, demoralizing the nation, as mentioned in my previous article, Spike Lee Metascript Breakdown. It's possible the culprit blamed for this future news fiction will be domestic rather than foreign. And I think that's really what it comes down to, because we have to also include in here, since we're talking about McVeigh and his motivation for the terror attack in Oklahoma City, the first World Trade Center thing, was also, we're talking about, like, before 9/11, before radical Islamic terrorists, you had the white nationalist terrorists, and it's like they're bringing that back in. So they had the Waco thing, but also he was inspired by Turner Diaries. And I've been noting how Turning Point USA is basically platforming Turner Diaries. And the Turner Diaries is by someone who coincidentally, obviously, because it's a coincidence, is written by a guy who was born 9/11, 1933, William Luther Pierce. So 9/11, 1933. But the Turner Diaries is a story about this hypothetical future, a violent revolution in the United States caused by the organization. This book was described as being explicitly racist and anti-Semitic by the New York Times. The organization's actions led to the overthrow of the federal government, a nuclear war, and a race war, leading to the systematic extermination of non-whites and Jews worldwide. Whites viewed as race traitors are hanged in mass executions they call the Day of the Rope. So Day of the Rope is a phrase that was floated around leading up to January 6th in a lot of these telegrams. So look at this here. The nooses seen on January 6th echo the day of the rope, a fictional insurrection described in the 1978. The meaning of the gallows in front of the Capitol of January 6th. So this is, again, what I'm saying is whatever's happening is happening in the context of the Turner Diaries. It says here, the book has been influential in shaping white nationalism and in the later development of white genocide conspiracy theory. So, yeah, okay, this is interesting because Nick Fuentes, of course, promotes the idea of white genocide, of white replacement theory. And in that Spike Lee movie, Black Klansman, David Duke, Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, looks just like present-day Nick Fuentes. And they're all saying the same thing, America first, which is essentially about closing borders and maintaining purity and preventing what they say is the extermination of the whites. So this is the premise, the plot of the Turner Diaries does involve white nationalists as the bad guys in this global terror event. Also, the name, the character, the Turner Diaries, I think the name Turner, Earl Turner, is a reference to Nat Turner, which, okay, Nat Turner is the basis for Django Unchained, played by Jamie Foxx, which we've talked about Jamie Foxx and his connection with BLM. And, of course, Christopher Dorner, They Clone Tyrone. Fascinating little trail to go down. But the name Turner, Turner Diaries, Nat Turner, these are all race war things. Slave Rebellion. Again, this one here is white versus black. It says the organization seizes the nuclear weapons at an Air Force base in Southern California, and they target missiles at New York and Tel Aviv. While in control of California, the organization ethnically cleanses the area of non-whites. Good luck with that. By forcing them into the eastern United States. So this story, again, it was written as like a journal, like a series to be like in a periodical. I have not read it in its entirety. I might just read it. It's insane, but I'm like, if you've been on Twitter for more than 6 months, you've pretty much read the Turner Diaries. Like, I've heard all this stuff. It's no longer even shocking. Written by William Luther Pierce. Now, he says here, he denied that he wrote the book intending for it to function as a model for a violent race war. But what's notable here is that it foreshadowed 9/11 itself. You know, attacks on government buildings with planes. And this guy was born on 9/11, just a coincidence. And not only did it inspire McVeigh over there at Waco, Texas, you know, he's at Waco where he sees the ATF killing the Branch Davidians. So this becomes his inspiration for his terror attack. But Alex Jones was also inspired at the Waco at that time. So there's this kind of overlapping here between, you know, Waco, white nationalism. It's kind of a nexus point, and that's why Trump kicks off his campaign in Waco for the 2024 presidential election. And the day before he kicks off his campaign there, Netflix released Waco, American Apocalypse. Of course, Dave Koresh did say that this was the apocalypse and he was going to come back and stuff. But I'm just showing you how the campaign, Netflix, it all has a subtext. Trump's like, oh, we just went to Waco because it was close. No, there's a subtext. And there's no way that whoever is behind the production of this Waco documentary knew that Trump was going to kick off his campaign there before he did, to have timed it like that. Anik says, new music video with Marilyn Manson falling in reverse. God is a weapon. 2:16 seconds long. Shows an electric god destroying only images of west-facing coasts. Looks like USA West Coast. Well, we've talked about Marilyn Manson's work, the significance with regard to the assassination thing, because his most recent album, One Assassination Under God, which came out following Butler, so the timing is pretty much perfect. But he released it on 11/22. And on tour, he closes his set with Como White, which has the video where he plays JFK getting assassinated. So you have this connection between him and JFK. He put out a video for that song, and he's the umbrella man, the person with the black umbrella near the Ford Lincoln before it was shot. And then just about a month and a half ago, he released a cover of Phil Collins' Genesis of In the Air Tonight. So I thought, well, what could that mean? Because if his content is being used to advance these meta script narratives, then that's probably not insignificant. And I'm thinking, well, In the Air Tonight would likely correlate with some kind of fallout. So if they do high altitude nuke over Seattle, for example, there's going to be blackouts, and they're going to say, don't leave your house, lock down, wear a mask. It's going to be like we were trained. We've already been house trained. We've already been through our obedience school. So we're ready for lockdowns, and it'll just be a different pretense. And instead of it being partisan, like some people are like, well, I'm not going to lock down because I don't trust the government. I don't trust the media. No one's going to do that. Because unlike a virus that some people can deny, fallout would be something you couldn't really dispute. And I mentioned this Nicolas Cage movie that came out in like 2019 or something. It was called The Humanity Bureau, where people are locked down because of radioactivity, and they're not allowed to own the Geiger counters. It's contraband. And when somebody gets their hands on one in the movie, they find out we're locked down for no reason. Imagine that. All right, let's see what else we have here. Jay Diggs says Turner Diaries is a major part of the movie The Order, starring Jude Law from last year. I'll have to check it out because in 2020 they brought the Turner Diaries to life with the McCloskeys, where the McCloskeys come out waving their weapons at Black Lives Matter, dressed up just like the cover of the Turner Diaries. And this is not unintentional. I mean, this is exactly what we would have expected. They're bringing back this imagery for a reason, because they were highlighting the central theme here, that whites are under attack by the Democrats, the deep state, and the one world that's going to destroy America and go after nationalists. But Turning Point USA is the permanent political action committee organization it's like the think tank for the far-right conservatives, and they've always platformed these ideas, usually with innuendo and dog whistles, but they have platformed essentially Turner Diaries. And Turning Point, well, what is the turning point? That's when they try to take the guns, for example. And that's why Alex Jones, I think it's interesting here, because, and I learned this in the documentary, Waco, American Apocalypse. The ATF goes in because there were 1.6 million rounds that they were storing illegally. Alex Jones helped rebuild the Branch Davidian Church. He was really involved with that whole psyop. Then he goes on Piers Morgan a few years later because the DHS purchased 1.6 billion rounds of hollow point rounds. So he goes on Piers Morgan and he says, 1776 will commence again if you try to take the guns. So the idea of they're going to take the guns has been one of the main themes of the whole InfoWars shtick for a long time. That, they're faking school shootings because they want a pretext to take your guns. When they take your guns, that's the point where we rise up and we fight the New World Order. That story is essentially Turner Diaries. So if you're owning an AR-15 and you're taking your super male vitality and listening to InfoWars, you are the resistance. Like, you are the firewall against global tyranny. That's the narrative there, is basically you being a truther, exposing the ops, are going to prevent the guns being taken because your guns in America happen to be the firewall against global tyranny, and you are a part of the resistance. That's all farcical and nonsense, but I remember thinking that the story made sense back when I thought the shootings were being perpetrated by Democrat politicians working with black ops in order to kill people to sway public opinion, which is what truthers generally still believe, the ones who haven't figured out about fakery. which again, I don't know how you could not be up to speed on that. Okay, Rebel Black says, I can see aspects of that piece of fiction playing out on the world stage. Well, this is the significance of the 6/11 death date of Timothy McVeigh at 33. Dave Koresh killed at 33. These are martyr numbers. Muhammad Atta, lead hijacker on 9/11, 33. So the 6/11 date has significance to Waco, to white nationalism, to Turner Diaries. And so Trump being shot at 6/11 is consistent. Tim Bellard being associated with the Bible verse, Timothy 6:11, is highly consistent with this. And even the reverse of it, 11:6, is heavily associated with the nuke. Even in the Batman movie, November 6th, Gotham underwater. But if you connect the two, the reoccurring connection here is the nukes. And so in the Batman movie, and this is another great example of the overlapping. So Batman comes out, is March 4th, 2022, and it was like midterms. And the midterm slogan for the Republicans was flood the polls. What happened in the Batman movie was the Riddler, who's a Q-like character, his symbol was the Q. I'm not the Q, the question mark, which is a big part of the Q thing, just asking questions, all about questions. So the QAnon type Riddler character instigates his online followers to blow up the dams, to interrupt the elections. That's why Gotham was underwater on 11/6. So the connection here, real life flood the polls, is being said by that side of the political aisle. And in the movie, they literally flood the polls by having their radicals do some terrorism. And this idea of the radical terrorists being domestic also, interestingly, has this connection with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda means the base. And the white nationalist group that has been associated with attacks on the power grid is called the base. This is from the SPLC, a white nationalist network that trains members in survivalism and paramilitary skills, preparing to mount an armed resistance. The base, a neo-Nazi accelerationist terrorist group founded in 2018. It's part of a broader neo-fascist skull mask movement. The base embraces Hitlerian ideology coupled with a mission to prepare for an impending race war. The base, a neo-Nazi group paramilitary training formed in 2018, and they espouse accelerationism and white nationalism. So again, Al-Qaeda means the base, and they did 9/11. Now we've got the base, and they're going to do a 6/11, or a domestic violent extremist counterpart to 9/11. At least this is the story as I have been interpreting it. And then we have Drastic Liars looking at this event with Seattle and the Space Needle, and all these very strong correlations with the date 6/11. And just as 9/11 was referenced a million times before they did it, we see a similar pattern here. So leading up to June 11th, I'm thinking, okay, well, I better see what he's up to. We're getting close to June. I find out that Final Destination's out, and it's putting out there into the zeitgeist a vision of a disaster centering on a space needle, which would obviously connect to Seattle. All right, let me go through my notes. I'm just scrolling through some of the things that I had highlighted here. We covered a lot of ground tonight, though. We'll be talking about this more as time moves on. So here's some pictures uploaded by Synchromorpheus. Before the Experience Music Project was changed to the Music of Pop Culture, the building had a sign that read EMP with the Space Needle looming right above it. Then you have Chris Cornell, the Soundgarden connection, Black Hole Sun, which I think even correlates in the movie with Ring of Fire that they were playing when the disaster started. But interestingly, Soundgarden's being put into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame right now. And then The Voice just had someone perform the song Black Hole Sun, which, Black Hole Sun, EMP, there's some kind of connection here. But again, this is right there, ground zero. Anik says the Blackout 1997 was released on June 11th, 1997. Okay, so I mentioned here that at the very beginning that the space station's tracking website is being shut down on 6/11. Well, back to the movie Final Destination, one of the main characters was in the series The 100, where I mentioned the space station explodes. Well, it explodes season 1, episode 13, but that episode aired on 6/11. So the season finale where the space station explodes is 6/11. So I thought, oh, that's an interesting connection here because, again, NASA is shutting down the ISS sighting website on 6/11. Now, there's something else too. So Leave the World Behind is one of these blackout movies. Then there's White Noise, blackout movie. I'll have to do a deep dive on this, but the fact that Leave the World Behind was put out by the Obamas is highly significant. And when I was searching for the movie before I watched it, I searched Obama blackout movie, and I found a movie called American Blackout that came out in 2013. That was this movie that involved a cameo with Obama, talking about how because of the blackout, we have to pay attention to the news, etc. So I noticed this other blackout themed movie, but that was the year of Super Bowl 47, where you had the 33-minute blackout. And so now we're in the presidency number 47. And for some time I thought that has to be foreshadowing for what's going to happen at this time. Anik says the Blackout 1997 released on June 11th. Well, anyway, there's a lot of reasons why that date would be significant, and we were vindicated anyway with the 11-3-311 thing. We said, hey, based on predictive media, it would seem that 11-3-311 will be a significant date regarding a worldwide event. And we were even remarking that boy band called World Order released that track on 3/11 called Let's Start World War III, which takes place in Seattle. And it has Trump in it. And at one point, Trump even, they simulate Trump being shot. He falls down in the snow, or they fall down in the snow while impersonating him. So when we were talking about this, I said, I'm watching Netflix, there's a show Colony. They say after the aliens invade that Seattle is ground zero for the reboot of civilization. So then we have an alien invasion, not literally, but we have this lockdown. And then they start talking about the Great Reset. But we noted that the whole scenario was declared a pandemic with patient zero in Seattle. So Seattle was ground zero for that entire event. And it happened on 3/11. That's when they declared it. So we're at that point, we're vindicated here. So our focus on the number isn't really flippant. It's just based on what we've seen. Calm Down says, have you looked into the death of Robert J. Matthews, head of the Order? If Ruby Ridge and Waco were Psyops, that too was probably a Psyop. Yeah, I think so. And so you mentioned Ruby Ridge. And a few months ago, or last year, you had that movie come out called Rebel Ridge. I watched it on Netflix. And the opening scene has a character, so you have a black protagonist on a bike. He's got a bag full of money to bail his cousin out. And the police pull him over, beat him up, and take his money. And so he has to fight the racist police department because it's got this subtext of systemic racism in the police. And the whole reason his cousin's in jail is probably because of that. But the story, again, is about systemic racism and this righteous rebel. It's called Rebel Ridge. And then, it's kind of like at the end of Sinners, where you're cheering for the guy to shoot all the racists up, even though they're the people in power, the Klan in that case. But in this one, the police are the bad guys, which is, again, the theme in Terminator 2, which followed up with the Rodney King. Lots of fascinating repeated themes here. I'm just looking at it. But to stick to this, Rebel Ridge comes out, and then a few days later, Tyreek Hill gets yanked out of his car. And people immediately draw comparisons. It wasn't me. I'm like, people are saying, you've got to see Rebel Ridge. It just happened. So I'm thinking Rebel Ridge seems to allude to Ruby Ridge, but on the other side. But that's kind of what we're talking about here anyway, is how these psyop themes, they're playing on these dualities. And so it went from outside alien terrorists to now it's going to be domestic terrorists. And I've talked about this before, how it seemed like what they introduced here in America with QAnon was something to correlate with the radical Islamic terrorists, in the sense that, okay, so, and I put this in one of the books, I think, and I'll probably reiterate it in Lie World. But if you look at the framework, you've got the West is evil, and the radical Islamic terrorists are against Western values. And then you have with the QAnon, it's the deep state and certain aspects of Western culture, like Hollywood and celebrities that they focus on. And if you look at the attitudes of what we call the MAGA ban, and how it mirrors the Taliban, and how they have the same enemies, the Great Satan, Little Satan, Israel, America, at least the side of America that is progressive. And I started looking at it as, it seems like they're introducing this new kind of domestic terrorist threat analogous to Quran radicals, but these are QAnon radicals. So instead of being motivated by Quranic verses that say fight the Great Satan, they got QAnon verses that say fight the deep state. And I don't think it's coincidental, that these things overlap in such a way. And you find many of the same dynamics put up there. Look at the idealization of the trad wife, for example, the attitudes they express towards Grammy Awards, and especially Hollywood and celebrities. QAnon has had this long-term objective of exposing the deep state, and they're looking forward to all these Hollywood celebrities, starting with Tom Hanks and Oprah Winfrey, being executed. We can't forget all these publicly declared fantasies of the celebrities being murdered on TV by the National Guard. That was the whole QAnon thing. And I've always said, it seems to be like they've manufactured a version of radical Islam. This radical ideology that is really about rejecting the West, and specifically, when you get into what QAnon is really about, you can kind of see the overlap with what they call anti-Semitic, blood libel. I'm saying it's completely inorganic, but in the public's mind, it exists. We have enough examples of QAnon people engaging in terrorism, engaging in the insurrection thing, where the public would accept the idea right now. Like right now, if we had another attack by radical Islam, it would seem out of context, out of place. Like that hasn't been in any of the movies in a long time. When is the last time we heard somebody screaming Allah Akbar with a bomb vest on, blowing up in a deli somewhere? Like, it's not a thing. They have to build up to it. But the only build-up we've had has been a build-up of white nationalist terrorists, whether they're shooting up malls or schools because of open borders and publishing manifestos. You have the Anders Breivik, you got the Brenton Tarrant shooting up Christchurch, necessitating the shutdown of BitChute and 4chan. So they've built this up for some time. Disease X, the mind virus, the madness. So anyway, leading up to 9/11, it was logical to conclude, hey, it seems like we're going to be attacked, clash of civilizations, Islam's the enemy. But now in 2025, no, there's really no pretext to that. The entire buildup has been for the domestic violent extremist thing. But I'll do my homework. I'll watch the Turner Diaries. Well, I'll listen to the Turner Diaries audiobook, and I'll take notes. I'm pretty sure we've heard it all, though. We didn't get through everything. Let me play this clip here. Luke Rudkowski posted this. When the apocalypse happens, expect to see this in social media. But this is AI. Now, I'm showing you this for two reasons. One, AI is so good, and people are so reality impaired that, yeah, we don't have any chance of refuting any claims when they pull off some big psyop. Here it is. It's not going to play. Well, all you're missing is this. It's at the point where you can't tell real from fake. And they're creating essentially crisis actors, AI crisis actors, with a few prompts. People walking down believable sets or believable cityscapes where everything's burning. And it's, I've been kind of, just to throw a little chaos for fun, I go onto Twitter and I'll see some video where people are overreacting about something, or they're emoting some rage bait. Like, oh, look at these youths pointing their guns at the camera. And I look at the rage bait being intentionally ginned up. And I'll go in there and I'll say, don't you know this is AI? And I start getting people agreeing with me. And I'm just doing it to see, because I read this thing about University of Zurich where they said they put these bots onto Reddit and they were getting people's opinions to change. And that the bots that they put out there were 6 times more persuasive than real people in changing people's opinions. And so I'm just testing it out. I'm like, yeah, I could go into a room here, into any chat room or any thread, and call the video fake or staged. There was this one where there's this kid making these terrible faces at this older man in the background. And the older man ran up and choked him for a minute and then let him go. And I said, oh, this is staged. They do this all the time in different locations. And a lot of people thought it was staged. Now, is that wrong of me to do that? No, this is science. This is anthropology. I mean, we're just alien anthropologists, and I'm just testing to see how reality impaired people are, how credulous they are. So we're ready for anything. Alien invasion, Godzilla. There's nothing that they can't manifest. They have the believers. That's what they need, just a legion of believers. There's a few other psyops I didn't get a lot of time to get into. We'll talk about the Miles Mathis broke this one down, the Elias Rodriguez thing, and then we'll follow up on the van attack, which I'm pretty sure is fake. Anyway, I want to say thanks everyone for the comments. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. I'll put a link to the Fakeologist episode, and I did put a link to the Space Needle stuff. So sorry if I rambled on this thing, but we're just getting really close to June 11th, which is a very significant date in this story. And what we're trying to do here, and we do it all the time, and we're consistently vindicated. We're just showing the overlap between contrived fake events that are obviously scheduled in advance and the mainstream entertainment that bolsters it. And Final Destination is just one of the latest examples of this, to the point where it's not just the future event, but the build up to it, like the opening of the elevator at this exact time. It's Lost Age says we have a transit on the full moon this year on 6/11 that commonly shows up with shocking, surprising events and psyops. Well, when the Space Needle destruction begins in the movie, they start playing the song by Creedence Clearwater, Bad Moon Rising. And I looked it up, and Bad Moon Rising seemingly came out in 1969. And the movie's set in 1968. So it's a continuity flaw, it's an error, but that just makes me think, because throughout the show, the music always lyrically connects with whatever's happening. So they needed that. So they tied in Bad Moon Rising and Ring of Fire to this scenario, just through the music. And as you may have seen in the trailer, they're playing Jenga, and the Jenga tower falls. And in Leave the World Behind, they have a Jenga tower fall, and it corresponds to the drones passing over with the Arabic flyers that say "Death to America." So they tie in 9/11. They thread the story back and forth. 9/11, Space Needle. Okay, well, I'm going to be sending out the archives here later on tonight. I want to catch up on what I was bringing up earlier again. I didn't catch the first half of it, but Fakeologist was speaking to Leo Pirate, and his page is mindwar.page. So I'll put a link below. I'm just trying to compile everything, but there's always more. We'll see you all tomorrow.
CIA be lurking, I be in the turban. Little ones stay cursing, older ones out twerking. Talking about lack of education, streets are always dangerous. Bluetooth speakers playing, do you really hear what they saying? Do you know what that means? Are you down for the team? They speak through signs and symbols, you can learn about these things. Live by 9/11, Club of 27. Once you think that they in heaven, nah bruh, it's a legend. It's all according to the code. Damn Illuminati on my mind, body, and my soul. That's why they snatching bodies, everybody in a Holly Grove. Deception is a hobby, switching roles with the auto clone. We call that an auto hoax.
Man, what you trying to prove? Don't you know we've been around the globe and been to the moon?
Get it, that's an auto hoax.
You tripping, times two. What about the shootings that they always cover on the news?
Real, that's an auto hoax.
They gon' move, we will make the way. Let it spray, right reality like an AKA. Let them know we don't play. They live like life's a party, but it's really like a breakaway. Meditate, focus your attention on your better days. You know what I'm talking about. Don't let these slimy narcissists, the antichrist out there turn your eye. Freedom of speech is actuality. That's why the truth must spread by word of mouth, word of mouth. It's all according to the code. Damn Illuminati with my mind, body, and my soul. That's why they snatching bodies, everybody in the Holly Grove. Deception is a hobby, switching roles with the auto clone. Let me turn on my auto hoax.
Not even a proven fact. The floor curves into a spinning ball, and you can test for that.
Globe is an auto hoax.
Man, you must be trolling me. Scientific theories aren't what they are shown to be.
Yup, that's an auto hoax.
So what you're saying is you don't accept the claim that's missing proof. Then you label it